Welcome to the Run Out. I am your host, Neil Barrett. I am back. It has been a crazy couple of weeks. I spent essentially every spare moment of the last two and a half weeks hard at work launching a company that, as of dropping the last episode, wasn't even a thought in my head. I had no idea this was coming. So that took up so much time that I was just exhausted. I tried to record an episode last week and I just couldn't do it. I just didn't have the willpower to do it. It has been that much of a whirlwind for me over the last couple of weeks, but I am back. And to make it up to you guys this week, I'm going to be dropping 2 episodes. Later this week, I will be joined by Phil Shore. For anyone who doesn't know Phil, amongst his many titles that we get into in the episode, he is currently the California Redwoods beat writer for the PLL. So we had a ton to talk about with all the things that have happened with the Woods this past month or so, and not even just the whole off season, which there are plenty of things to get into, but specifically in the past month or so, it has just been story after story after story for them. So we had a ton of things to get into. But on today's episode, I am once again joined by Adam Levi. For anyone who missed my first podcast episode with Adam back in November, Adam is a writer for Lacrosse Culture Daily, Inside Lacrosse, the NLL, several other big name brands. And he also has his own really cool podcast, the Lacrosse Matrix podcast, where he combines stats and stories from the National Lacrosse League to provide insights and perspective on some of your favorite NLL stars and stories. He also runs Preston's Picks, a pick'em game online where you can test your NLL knowledge against Adam's son, Preston. He is one of my favorite follows in lacrosse, and it's always a blast to have him on the Run Out. Unfortunately, due to some scheduling conflicts, he had a hard out and I had a meeting that ran over, and then we had some internet issues. So our, hour long went to about 40 minutes. And then because of internet issues, we ended up with only about 20 minutes. But I think it was a good and fun and worth your time 20 minutes, and we will definitely have to get Adam back on the show to have a longer conversation, maybe during the NLL playoffs. Also, I should probably let you know that we recorded this almost 2 weeks ago now, before I knew that I wasn't going to get it up and posted in my normal routine of once a week. I think the conversation largely still holds up, but just know that if you hear me or Adam say something that sounds a little weird, it's likely because we recorded this 2 weeks ago without the knowledge that you, the listener, now have. So just kind of understand. Again, I think it still largely holds up. Most of what he talked about came to pass or is still kind of working itself out. So I think it works out, and I think it's still a fun interview to hear, and maybe even more fun with the added context of knowing that it was 2 weeks ago and maybe some things have changed and maybe some things haven't. But before we get to Adam, and especially because it's a slightly shorter interview, let's talk some NCAA lacrosse. As we head into April, it feels like the tournament picture is becoming slightly more clear, maybe slightly, just a little bit. I don't know. As I've said basically all season, and I'm once again stealing this line from Dan Arestia, no one is good this season. Everyone is medium. I think we would all probably have some combination of Maryland, Cornell, Princeton, and probably Ohio State, I think, has kind of slid into that top 4. But none of them look unbeatable. They're clearly the favorites to kind of win it all, but I don't think anyone would be super shocked to see any of those four go out in the first round either. I mean, it would be a surprise, but based on how kind of everyone has played, you probably wouldn't think too hard about it. You'd be like, well, yeah, it's just been one of those kind of years where no one is truly separated themselves from the rest of the pack. Almost everyone in the top 25 feels in play in some way, not necessarily for a championship per se, but it feels like every single team in that range could miss the tournament completely or make the final four, and neither end of that spectrum would be any kind of huge shock to anyone. If Richmond ends up in the final four, I don't think anyone's really gonna bat an eye. Same thing if they miss the tournament. If they don't win their conference championship, there's a decent chance they don't even make the tournament. So all that to say, this is simultaneously one of the most fun and most frustrating seasons I can remember. Obviously, as a fan, being unable to predict a team's level from week to week is a ton of fun. It makes the games super interesting and engaging, and not really knowing what's going to happen from a week to week basis. But as someone who runs a podcast and social media that spends most of the year talking about the sport of lacrosse and has to answer for the things that he says, it's fairly frustrating to say something one week and be made to look a fool the next week. And the lack of consistency makes it nearly impossible to not just be getting beat down all season. And that is kind of a good intro into Duke this year. The Blue Devils went up to South Bend and got smacked around by Notre Dame, losing 14-7. And for me, it's not just that they got beat. I don't know that I would have necessarily picked Duke to win this game. I think most of us think that Notre Dame is probably at least a slightly better team, but it's really about how they got beat. That first half was just so flat and uninspiring and just bad. Like, not even, I don't think that there was anything that you could take away from that first half game tape. If you're Duke, it's one of those ones where you just kind of burn the tape and forget it happened and try and move forward, because there's nothing that you can really learn from that first half. And while they did technically probably play better and arguably just about even with Notre Dame in that second half, the damage had already been done. And of course, you can always say, like, well, Notre Dame took their foot off the gas, or, was trying some other things, which may have been true. I'm not trying to say that they didn't, but you can at least kind of look at that second half and say, well, maybe if they had played like that the whole game, maybe it's a different story. Again, maybe they don't lose, but they don't get smacked around. They don't lose 14-7. But I got to hold my hands up and take it on the chin and say I was wrong. Again, not that I necessarily would have picked Duke to win this game, but, obviously I have thought that Duke was better than this game at least was evidence of. I still think Duke is more the team from that second half than from the first half. But again, we can also say that Notre Dame probably took their foot off the gas a little bit, but their inability to play 4 full quarters all season finally caught up to them. Additionally, that was the first time that I saw the Notre Dame team look like the team that people thought was capable of three-peating this season. We will see what happens with both of these teams over the next few weeks as they get into ACC play. But this weekend looked like two teams moving in opposite directions. Notre Dame looks like they're beginning to build on things and could start to become a dangerous team as we move towards the tournament. And Duke feels like it's going the opposite way. They started off pretty strong and they've just kind of been fading down the stretch. And maybe that is a product of people starting to figure them out, not really knowing what to expect, especially with so much turnover from last season to this season and people early in the season, not really knowing what to expect and who to key on and stuff. But another part of it seems to be that maybe the John Danowski system that has for so long put guys into kind of cogs of the machine is maybe not working out as well as it has previously. I have a really, really tough time with Andrew McAdory, just not being the guy for that team when he is clicking, everything is work. And that doesn't necessarily mean he's scoring goals, but when he is dodging hard to the cage, he makes things happen. And like I have said pretty much all season, I would have that dude playing an attack at least at this level. I know PLL is looking at him, projecting him to be a midfielder, and that may be what happens to him at that level. But at this level, he can take on just about every single defender in the country, and I would want him handling the ball almost every single play that we ever had. I know Eric Moliver is also having a very solid season as well. And I just feel like those two running an attack line for Duke would be really, really tough. But the reaction to this game is one of the things that I kind of wanted to talk about. I'm not going to do a full kind of breakdown of NCAA games. We're gonna try and move on and catch up with some games next week. But after this game, my mentions were blowing up with people calling Duke a fraud. I saw posts everywhere that were saying Duke was no longer a national championship contender, which just really makes me laugh, because as a Duke fan, I was asking, when were they ever a national championship contender? I know that everyone wants their viral moment and hot takes and overreactions supposedly sell on social media, but these conversations are so insincere, especially in a season like this where, again, everyone is medium. No one has separated themselves. But for Duke, before the season, all you heard about was the 835 points that they graduated last year and how they were going to have to replace them. My mentions were blowing up with how Duke was going to comfortably be the worst team in the ACC. I know that they were voted to be the second worst team in the ACC preseason poll, that they were going to be second to last in front of only North Carolina, which how North Carolina was at the bottom of that list, I don't know, because they clearly had Owen Duffy and Dom Petramala, and they had some weapons in there, whereas Duke didn't have basically anything in the cupboard. I don't know how people voted Duke above North Carolina in that situation. I think most people that I know of had North Carolina as one of the favorites to win the ACC, but in the official ACC preseason poll, that was the way that they were ranked. And then after the game against Michigan, and once again after the game against Richmond, everyone was saying that Duke were frauds, which is bizarre because in order to be a fraud, there has to be some level of expectation placed on you. And again, I'm asking, at what point did anyone think that Duke was a national championship contender? I am the biggest Duke fan in the world, and even I was like, yeah, this team is not a national championship level contender. And they make it to the Final Four, maybe. They get some things right on their end, and they get, maybe a decent draw in the tournament selection. Then, yeah, I think they could be a Final Four team, but you've heard me say it on this show several times that a Final Four was going to be their championship. If they could get to that, that was like them reaching probably their peak this season. So I don't understand this whole idea of frauds and not national championship contenders, and this whole conversation about Duke specifically, but it's easy for me to talk about Duke because I am a Duke fan. So, social media being what social media is, algorithms being what algorithms are, I see that stuff. It comes across my, platforms and stuff. And so I see the things that are leveraged against them, but it is not in any way exclusive to Duke. In fact, it's not even exclusive to the teams playing the game. Last week, we saw a huge overreaction from the lacrosse community after Maddie Palom upheld a no-goal call that, to our eyes, was clearly a goal. The internet was ablaze with comments about how Maddie shouldn't have a job, that he always, quote unquote, always makes it about himself, and how much this is a travesty for the sport and how lacrosse will never be taken seriously with refs blowing calls like this. Despite the fact that missed calls are something that happen in every major sport, in every country, everywhere. And even with replay and automation and much higher levels of scrutiny, those things still happen on a consistent weekly basis in the biggest sports in the world. These are the things that people are spouting off, and all this vitriol and noise finally came to a head about 24 hours later when the real story came out that Maddie was only able to use the in-stadium review system, which had a questionable angle and supposedly a very poor quality, and he was not given access to the Big Ten network view that clearly showed the ball enter the goal. But people had already spent 24 hours absolutely shredding one of the best and most respected referees in our game. And it's only because he's the only ref anyone knows. The PLL has done a lot of great things, and I totally understand why they wanted to platform Maddie. He's such a big personality and definitely gets the league views, but all it has done is put his name in everyone's mouths to the point where every call that goes wrong is presumed to be him. Even when he's not on the field, there were people calling out plays saying, look at Maddie, look at all these bad calls. And it wasn't even him making the calls. Like, not even just it was a different referee on the field. Literally, it was Maddie wasn't even reffing in that game, and he was getting blamed for those calls. And every call that he does make that's even remotely debatable suddenly becomes, oh, this is quote unquote Maddie being Maddie and inserting himself into the game. I legitimately had people telling me on social media last week that refs have no excuse for making mistakes and demanding perfection from human beings. It's almost as if they think that Maddie, or any ref for that matter, is out there intentionally screwing things up like this. There's no room in these conversations for nuance. There's no room for understanding a situation, and absolutely no room for grace. Instead, everything is very black and white. You missed a call, you're biased trash, and you shouldn't have a job. You lost, so you must be a fraud. And even in situations where you won, that automatically, quote unquote, makes you the better team. No ifs, ands, or buts. Despite every sports movie in the history of Hollywood telling us that a plucky upstart can in fact beat the juggernaut, this concept seems lost on us as a sporting community. Instead, it's Michigan is a better team than Maryland. And, of course, Duke beat Michigan, so they're even better. And Denver beat Duke, so they're clearly the best, but Villanova just beat Denver. So I'm announcing right here, right now, in a Runout exclusive, that St. Joseph's is the 2025 NCAA Division I men's lacrosse national champion after they beat Villanova 3 weeks ago. I know that we have an entire generation of people that grew up on First Take and the idea that whoever screams the loudest is the winner. But can we please give these bad faith takes and over the top overreactions to every single little thing that happens on a field a rest, please? Very, very few things are black and white. We live in a world of gray. There are humans involved in everything that we do. There is nuance involved in everything that we do. And I think that we are much better served by discussing the nuance and detailing what does and doesn't go into these kinds of things than we are to make bold proclamations based on 0.01% of the story. That is my rant for the week, I guess. I don't know, rambling, I guess, but it felt like something that needed to be said, I guess. I don't know. Just something that was on my mind a lot in the last couple of weeks, I guess. Let's move on. I thought now would be a good time to look back at Final Four predictions and see if there is any kind of adjustment that needs to be made. If you'll remember the last time that I picked a Final Four, I had Maryland, Princeton, Penn State, and UNC as my Final Four. I think you could hold tight on those four. UNC dropped a close one to Army this past weekend, but they definitely still have the talent to be there on Memorial Day weekend. Penn State picked the wrong time for some very, very important guys to their team to be trying to come back from injury, playing against Ohio State and then Maryland in their first games back. So again, they could still very much end up there. Princeton's loss to Cornell has kind of been the only down spot on their resume, and they have picked up very good wins against very, very solid teams in Harvard and Dartmouth in the 2 weeks since that game. And Maryland still kind of feels like the team to beat. They lost by 1 goal to Michigan, a team that they just cannot seem to figure out for whatever reason. Michigan over the past few seasons has frustrated Maryland, and the Wolverines have become a puzzle that John Tillman and the Terps just have not been able to figure out. And I hope that we get a rematch of that game in the Big Ten tournament, because it's going to be such a fascinating game to see Tillman and I'm totally blanking on, I think it's Conroy at Michigan, watching those two kind of go at each other and try and game plan for what has and hasn't worked, especially John Tillman, who is largely considered one of, if not the best coach currently in Division I lacrosse. For him to not be able to get over this hump of Michigan the last couple of years, I know probably bugs him, and I am really looking forward to seeing how he tries to counter what they're doing. So all that to say, I think you could definitely hold tight on those 4 teams. I don't think there's huge alarm bells for any of them. That being said, I told you guys when I made these predictions that I was reserving the right to change my mind as the season went along and we got more information. So with that in mind, I'm definitely keeping Maryland in, as much as I think everyone is medium and everyone is beatable, and not just in the normal anything can happen kind of way. Maryland has set themselves up as the team at the top of our not so high pile. So definitely going to keep Maryland in my Final Four prediction. Next up, I think I'm going to stick with Princeton. The Cornell game aside, I think they have been very good and very consistent. 2 things that I think are going to carry them deep in the tournament. I really want to stay with Penn State as my 3rd team. I really like that team, and I think they have all the tools, but it feels like CJ Kirst and Cornell have started to figure themselves out. I wasn't too impressed early in the season with them and the way that they were playing, but the last 3 or 4 weeks, they have really kind of shifted into another gear and are going to be very, very tough to beat. So I'm going to throw Cornell in there. And the last team is it's a tough one. I think the easy pick here is Ohio State, and I would love to see the Buckeyes make some waves. The saying defense wins championships is a saying for a reason, and that is definitely a championship caliber defense led by Bobby Van Buren, who is going to be playing on a PLL roster somewhere this summer, unless he has a redshirt year. I know he was out for at least a year with an injury. I don't know if he was redshirted. Lots of teams don't list redshirts. They just list their grade level. So I don't know if he has another year of eligibility. And even if he does, there's no guarantee that he will use it. But barring that he decides to go back to Ohio State next year, he will be playing on a PLL field somewhere this summer. Someone in some group chat, I was saying, it may have been Dan, now that I'm thinking about it, was saying that Bobby Van Buren would be a PLL first rounder in any draft he had come out in. If he had come out last year in, the quote unquote greatest draft ever, he would have been a first rounder. He'll be a first rounder this year. He'll be a first rounder next year. It doesn't matter when he comes out. He will be a first rounder. He is that level of player. But again, all that being said, I am going to try and play a little bit of strategy here and say that whoever wins the ACC, which right this second, I'm looking at Cuse and UNC. Notre Dame fans, calm down. I know you're losing your mind at me right now. Like I said, this past weekend against Duke was the first time that I saw that championship caliber team that we had heard about. And if that's the team that continues showing up over the next couple of weeks through ACC play, they will walk right into the middle of this conversation. I just want to see it a few more weeks before I try and jump on that bandwagon. It's one thing to do it against this Duke team. It's another thing to continue to do it week in and week out. But if they do, they will be in this conversation, absolutely. But I think whoever wins the ACC will be my fourth pick because, like we talked about last time, I think they will be, whoever it is, will be a high enough seed that they'll have a relatively quote unquote easy path to the Final Four. In lacrosse, you only have to win 2 games to make the Final Four. And I think that if you are a high enough seed, you will play someone like a MAC champion, maybe in the first round, a Siena or Canisius or someone like that. And then in the second round, you'll get a team like a Richmond or Army, or maybe even a team like Michigan if they rattle off a Big Ten championship like they have done the last 2 seasons. That is good, is a quality opponent, and could probably beat them, but generally speaking, doesn't have the defensive power to stop either Cuse or Notre Dame's offensive power. So I think it's one of those situations where an ACC champion could kind of, I don't want to say luck because it's not luck, but could draw a relatively, again, quote unquote, easier path to a Final Four, where it's not until Memorial Day weekend that they are even being challenged to a point where you think they could realistically lose the game. So today, that is my Final Four prediction: Maryland, Princeton, Cornell, and the ACC champion. If pressed right this moment, I'm going to hold on to UNC. I think they're slightly better defensively than Cuse, but I really do think that game could go either way. It's not going to surprise me if Cuse blows the doors off of them. It's not going to surprise me if UNC blows the doors off of Cuse. it's such a toss up right now between those two teams. So I think, again, if pressed, I think I'd pick UNC, but either way, the ACC champ is my fourth team to make the Final Four. All right, I'm going to stop yapping now. Let's get to Adam Levy and talk some NLL lacrosse. We are here with Adam Levy once again. We are here to talk about the season that has happened so far in the NLL and look ahead a little bit to the next few weeks as we head towards the NLL playoffs. First of all, Adam, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, Neil, thank you for having me on again. We were talking off air that, it's been an exciting soccer season for the two of us. Definitely different emotions a little bit for either of us. But, I think we can both say the same about this NLL season that we've been having. And, it's going to be a great final month. We are actually at the 1 month point until the end of the regular season today as we're recording on March 19th. So, very, very cool stuff.
That's awesome. So I'll start with the closest I got to kind of picking a team, especially when they got Michael Sowers actually playing on that roster. And I will ask you, sort of looking back, what happened to the Wings? They started so good and then just kind of tailed off.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those questions that a lot of us NLL analysts are kind of pondering, and I think within that Philadelphia Wings locker room, they're wondering the same thing. And I actually asked Stamper, we were recording earlier today our weekly show Inside the World of Box Lacrosse, which you can find on Inside Lacrosse, It Wobble, as it's known mostly. And I asked him that straight question about, have we seen a team like Philadelphia with the offensive weapons that they have we seen a team just underperform so consistently like this? And, he initially was like, I have no idea. He's going to look into it. We're both going to look into it, try and figure it out because, you got Mitch Jones, Joe Rezaterets, Blaze Reardon, Michael Sowers was in for a couple games. Brendan O'Neill's there. Sam LeClaire, there's just so many weapons. And when they're scoring 8, 10, 11 goals in a game, I mean, that is just so underperforming. And really, I know it sounds harsh, but if you really look at it, that's a compliment to be saying that we expect this Wings offense to be scoring 12, 13, maybe even 14 goals a game with the weapons that they have. So, I think it's unfortunately a little too late for them. I think that with the schedule they have and where they sit in the NLL standings at this point, I believe it's 5 and 8. They're in a really bad spot to make a real playoff run. So, hopefully they can figure it out by next year. I liked what I saw from Sowers. He's so fast. There's often some concern with guys that are on the smaller side, which he is. For a lacrosse player, I say small. I say that because we're basically the same build, at least in terms of height and weight, and but these guys in the NLL 6 foot, 200 pounds or 190 and 6'1", and so I've been really impressed with what he did. But he was always kind of this filler for Sam LeClaire when he was going to be out. They had a game where they played together. It was great. But yeah, the Wings, I hope they can figure it out. They still, have some defensive issues clearly as well. I think that more time with Chris Corbeil and Mitch Desnu there, as well as Shane Simpson, that will come together. But, a big question mark for the long term is, are those guys going to be there next year? And for how long will they be there? So I think that there's a lot of questions, unfortunately, again, surrounding the Wings, which I don't think we thought we'd be here because they were 5 and 2 and looking great. Yeah. And we were saying, oh, look, the tide has turned. Everything's hunky dory. Well, apparently not. So unfortunately, we are talking negatively about the Wings again and wondering what is going
on. So that was talking about the Mitch Desnu and the guys that they grabbed is a good transition into the trade deadline. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask, before we get off of the Wings real quick. Sure. At one point, I know you you had Brennan O'Neill as the rookie of the year. Would you say he's still up there, or has that moved?
He's still up there. And I also had Mitch Jones as an MVP contender as well. I was really I was so pumped for the Wings, not only because I was getting to go to those games in person and see that environment and see this team thrive, but yeah, Brennan was having a great season. I think that this year's Rookie of the Year ballot is going to be, our voting is going to be so close. We've got so many great rookies. Will Johansson of the Albany Firewolves is a favorite for many. Adam Poitras. Now, we don't know the status of his injury. He was injured and it looked pretty bad during that Seals game, landing in the crease. It looked like he almost might have landed on his hand or the stick on his hand in the crease pretty hard. He needed a lot of help getting off and spent some time on the ground. So, that will hurt his chances, but he was my front runner as a couple of weeks ago. But then, you got Dyson Williams, who's starting to click, had a great clutch game this past weekend against the Georgia Swarm. So I think that really there's so many different guys, and I think it's going to be so interesting to see who ends up winning, because you can make a case for at least 4 or 5 different guys, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, and Dyson's one that, like you said, started a little slow, but definitely feels like he's coming on. So let's get into the trade deadline. That was the first question I had was on the trade deadline day. Obviously, there's a very obvious answer to this question, but I'm just looking at just the day, kind of ignoring the drama of the situation over the last year. Mm-hmm. Was it more surprising to you that Christian Del Bianco was actually traded, mm-hmm. or that some combination of Tom Schreiber and Brad Cree were not traded?
So that is a great question. And I think that both were a little bit surprising. Christian Del Bianco, there were kind of these points in the season where you could have said, okay, now's the time where Calgary can trade him, and that makes sense. Obviously, acquiring Nick Rose right before the deadline moves that whole scenario up a little bit. That clearly played a factor here. But also, it is interesting because the Colorado Mammoth did know that they were going to be without Zed Williams, and they probably knew before it was announced that they were going to be without Eli McLaughlin as well, knowing he didn't just say to them one day, hey, I'm going to go try and be a fireman. I'm not going to be here for who knows how many months. So they probably knew that as well. Interesting that they didn't pick up a guy like Tom Schreiber, even if it was for the season, because he is a UFA at the end of this year. But at the same time, I had been hearing that after those moves, that flurry of moves by Jamie Dowick and The Rock to get rid of a couple guys and get a bunch of picks back, that with the guys that were remaining, he had confidence and he wanted to see what that group could do. And then, of course, The Rock won the weekend before the trade deadline, which, again, if you're winning and you just traded away those pieces and you're telling those guys you got confidence in them, well, you're not going to go trade them. Right. The win for them, I think, was the cherry on top of the cake in terms of saying, okay, we're not going to move any pieces there. So I guess to answer the question, the Del Bianco trade was more surprising because we really never knew when this was going to happen. I think that there were maybe almost as many people who thought that he could be sitting out for multiple years as they thought he would be traded at this point of the season. It really came as a surprise to everyone, including him, which was really cool to kind of see that unfold. I think that would be my answer then.
Okay. All right. What in that was obviously the big headline trade, the Christian Del Bianco move, but what in your mind was the, or maybe one of a couple of kind of underrated moves that will pay off at a level people aren't necessarily expecting, maybe?
Well, I think that the why am I blank? The James Barclay trade was a really good one for the San Diego Seals because, and I'm just trying to check on his age right now. But he's a younger, capable guy who very talented, fearless in terms of blocking shots, having at that defensive core, 29 still. So he's got like at least a handful of years left to be really, really solid on the defensive end. And so I think that that's a great pickup for San Diego. And once they're completely healthy, which they're still banged up with a bunch of injuries, that lineup is stacked. So I think that's a really sneaky pickup. And then, of course, the Wings, I would have said if you had asked me right after the trade deadline that the Wings pickups of Corbeil and Desnu, and then also Shane Simpson would have been the deals. But, that hasn't really panned out. So if we go again on the premise that we don't know if those guys are even going to be back next year or for how long they will be with the Philadelphia Wings, it's hard to say that is the deal that won the trade deadline outside of the Del Bianco deal, because it's just not working. Yeah.
That's again, it's like what questions I'm going to ask, which you don't, because I didn't actually. I normally send you the questions. I did not this time. But that kind of leads me into my next question, which was away from the, we're what, a little over a week and a half away from the trade deadlines. Most everyone I think has played one game. Who is the best team in the league right now?
The best team in the league right now, I mean, even with their slide, I'm going to say that it is still the Buffalo Bandits. I mean, the way that they took care of Calgary in Calgary after that very disappointing loss to Calgary in Buffalo, I'm just going to keep hitting home this nugget that I was looking up, that, for them, for the 2 weeks that they had, and I spoke to Kyle Buchanan of the Buffalo Bandits for the Lacrosse Matrix podcast, my podcast, which you can find on Spotify, and the mix of emotions between that loss in Buffalo, where he said post-game, you could hear a pin drop in the locker room. They were just in like, what the bleep do we do mode right now? What's going on? To having that incredible defensive effort and really putting it to the Calgary Roughnecks at home. So, for the Calgary Roughnecks, this tied their franchise low, and they've been around since 2002. Their franchise low for home goals was 6. And the Buffalo Bandits, it was the first time in 7 years that they've allowed 17 goals in a regular season game. So pretty remarkable juxtaposed kind of stats there. But also that not only speaks to, the Buffalo Bandits' resilience, but it speaks to the incredible parity and the unpredictability of the National Lacrosse League, which is one of the reasons we all love this league.
Once again, it's like you have read my questions, because the next question is, who's the team best suited to stop the Bandits? Because that's not necessarily the second best team. You talked about San Diego, and those two, it doesn't matter who's up, who's down. Those two always seem to just match up really well against each other. So in your mind, who's the team that's best suited to actually prevent the Bandits from completing their three-peat?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if the San Diego Seals were completely healthy and had everyone in the lineup like they wanted to, and everyone that was fully healthy, and that includes Trevor Baptiste too, if he was, winning faceoffs for that offense right now, the way that they're playing, that would be tremendous. That would be such a huge help. But we don't necessarily know the official timeline for that. The latest that I had heard was that it was kind of a week-to-week thing. At least that's what Patrick Merrill said the last time we spoke. Now, I'm sure that that is a very vague kind of here's a whatever answer for you, because we haven't seen Trevor for the entire season pretty much, except for one game after he re-injured himself, and I don't think any of us knew when he would be back, and it's been several months now. So yeah, I think there's too many questions around San Diego. So I'm actually going to go to the team that is probably the most predictable answer, which is I'm going to go with the Saskatchewan Rush. They are such a good team. They are so deep at every position. They even in their loss to Buffalo when they lost 9-7, holding Buffalo to under 10 goals is an incredibly difficult thing to do. Again, I don't know the nugget offhand, but it had been like a couple years, I believe, since the Bandits had been held under 10 goals in a game. And that is, with that offense and with everything they're capable of, just so impressive. Now, the big question surrounding them, although he did well in that 9-7 game, is Frank Chiliano, who's having a great season. But unfortunately, and I'm sure he knows it too, and this is not a surprise to anyone, he has trouble in big games. He has, whether it's the WLA sometimes or the NLL, when he needs to win a game, he's usually outplayed, which is unfortunate. However, this does look like one of his best seasons that he's having. I'm always going to give a guy the benefit of the doubt, no matter who it is. If you're playing well, you've proven to us enough that you can do something that maybe you haven't done before. So I think that Frank can do that. Now we just have to wait and see if he can.
Speaking of players playing well, I'm, like I said earlier, I have not done the best job of keeping up with the NLL and getting to watch the games. Actually, I think that might have been before we started recording. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I know some of the names, but I also feel like I don't know who's kind of, especially at this point in the season. It was easier at the beginning of the season. Who are the players to watch in terms of the MVP race for this last month of the season heading to the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a lot of names that you would know already. I think that Josh Smith and Josh Byrne and Dane Smith, they really do feel like one person sometimes.
Sometimes.
Together. But Josh Byrne and Dane Smith are always in that conversation with the season that they're having and the way that they're helping the Bandits. Now, what doesn't help them, and this is always the big question, is, well, when you have 2 1A players, how do you give one the vote? And then also you got to give credit where credit is due. And the Bandits' entire offense is looking great. You've got so many different guys contributing. And so, that may change things for them. I would also say that the way that Connor Fields has been playing lately has been phenomenal. Back-to-back 5-goal games. He's averaging over 9 points a game in his last 4. Rochester's on a 4-game winning streak. They're in a spot where not only are they in the playoffs if it ended today, the regular season ended today, but they are looking like they could be competing for a home playoff game right now. And if that happens and they end up continuing on this hot streak and he's continuing the rate he's going, he'll be not only helping his team get a home playoff game, but he'll be the first player in NLL history to have 125 points and 150 loose ball recoveries in a single season. It's hard not to look at him as an MVP contender. And then you got to look, at a guy like Curtis Dixon or Dane Doby, or even, throw in Jesse King there. The captain, the leader of that Calgary Roughnecks team. They have shocked a ton of people. I know they're not shocked. They're like, well, we knew what we could do. I mean, what team doesn't say that? But, they believe that they believe that they think that they were going to be a good team this year. But yeah, they've surprised a lot of people. So maybe you look at someone from Calgary. Then again, it just, these teams are so deep. Like, it's hard. You would say, well, Saskatchewan's really good. Why don't you look at them? Well, their team individually, they're all so great, but it's like it's what they do as a group that makes them phenomenal. And I think if you take out one piece, like, how much is that going to change? They're just so deep. They're so good. They're so talented at every position. How can you say that one guy is the MVP? So I would say that those names that I mentioned would probably be who I'd be looking at.
I appreciate you throwing Jesse King in there. I don't know if you saw my tweet the other day. That was one of the games I threw on while I was working. I was watching the Calgary Buffalo game from last week, and I love Jesse King. I don't know what it is specifically about him, but I've always loved watching him play. I loved him in the PLL. I wish he was playing there again. But yeah, he's just so good. So I really like you saying that.
He's got good guy vibes. Like, he is literally one of the nicest guys in the National Lacrosse League, and in all of lacrosse. Just like such a down home, humble dude. Very quiet, but a great leader. Leads by example. I mean, he is a lacrosse coach's favorite player because of the way that he just does everything you want him to. No questions asked. He's just a great leader. He's a tremendous dude.
So I know we talked about soccer several times, and you just kind of stretched, and I noticed you're wearing a Liverpool sweatshirt.
Unintended, but yes, I am wearing that.
That's funny. I was like, I know that logo. I'll get you out on this because I know you've got to go. We talked about Jesse King. You talked about Trevor Baptiste and stuff. I thought I want to ask you a question that you've probably been asked a lot, but in the other direction. Mm-hmm. Who is an NLL player right now that you think would make a PLL player who isn't playing the PLL, that would make a good PLL player that could make that transition? We talk about it the other way all the time, probably because it's so much more rare.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was watching games this weekend and thinking about Jesse King and stuff, and who's a guy in the NLL that you think could make that jump to the PLL, as we're coming up on the start of the PLL season as well as the end of the NLL season.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked that question, and I have been asked that question before. So I love that there are PLL fans and field lacrosse fans who are wondering what NLL guys can be a benefit. One guy, and I know that he's not going to be playing for the PLL this season, but a guy who is very capable in the field game, I think, and even in the sixes style, would be a Larson Sundown, who is fast. He's creative. He can score in a bunch of different ways. He had very successful collegiate career. So he's, I'm totally blanking on where he went to school at the moment, but I know that where he went to school, he had one of the top goal scoring seasons of all time. I'm just going to look this up quickly because I need to know. Limestone. When he was at Limestone, he had a 70 goal season. And he's just an elite goal scorer. And if you're doing that, at the top of Division II and, showing what you do, he also played at RIT for a season, which is very impressive. I think that he's one of those guys. I think that you want to look at those guys that are multifaceted, as the game is transitioning towards the sixes style. You want to look at those, we don't call them midfielders in the box game, but those transition players who are multifaceted. I mean, I think that's why you see a guy who often, unfortunately, gets snubbed from the All-Star game, like Ian McKay, who's just beloved and people love his game in the PLL because he can just do a little bit of everything. Bigger guys too. I think that Jake Boudreau is another one who is a very talented guy who, transition player, plays defense, knows how to score, very athletic. He's a guy that's very capable. It'd be great, to see a guy like Elijah Gash really step into a role in the PLL. I know that there's some questions around him. I mean, he's young and we saw him kind of lose, or he gets very passionate, especially during his fights and stuff.
That's a word for it.
Yeah, but he, he is still young. He's still trying to figure it all out. And I think that, physical build-wise, I mean, he's a beast. He's a monster. And he's in the NLL for a reason, and he's very talented. So if you could get him a bunch of reps in the PLL and, find a coach that can make sure that he keeps everything in line, and he's super focused on being the best lacrosse player he can be, which I believe that is his intention and his focus, that he would be a great PLL player.
Gotcha. That's awesome. I didn't even think about, a Larson Sundown kind of guy. I've seen him in the NLL a lot. And obviously Elijah Gash had his crazy viral moment earlier this year. So I think everybody knows who he is at this point, but yeah, that's good to know. Well, again, I know you got to get out of here. So thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it. And again, hopefully we'll get you back at some point in the not too distant future to talk more NLL.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm always available. I'm sorry I don't have more time this time, but maybe next time we're talking right after Liverpool clinches the Premier League title. We're only a few weeks away from that, I guess. So it's unless we have an epic collapse.
I changed my mind. You can come back next year.
But I do hope, Neil, that you enjoy this final month of the regular season, catch as much of the playoff action as possible. It's going to be an amazing end of the season.
The NLL playoffs remind me a lot of the NHL playoffs. For 20 years, I've said that the NHL playoffs were the best. Like the level of play just goes so much higher. Like, not that they're sandbagging or anything, they're playing hard and stuff, but there's just something about the playoffs where it just goes to this next level every year. So I'm really looking forward to catching some of that. So
yeah, I'm excited to make it up to Banditland. I haven't done it during the regular season because I'm saving it for the postseason. I know
it'll ruin it, I think.
Yeah, they'll be hosting, I imagine, at least a couple playoff games, and that environment, man. You've never been to Banditland, have you?
I haven't.
That is, you got to check that out, especially if you can make it up during the playoffs, man. I've been to a lot of sporting events. There is nothing like that in the playoffs. It really does compete with all of the top 4 sport environments in North America. It's really special.
I'll get you out on this. I will share a story that I think you can appreciate about why maybe don't go during the regular season. Although Banditland is always a very good venue, but playoffs are playoffs. And the very first time I ever got to see Manchester United play in person, they had come over for one of those US tours in the summer, and they were playing in DC. Yeah. And I bought tickets. I was like, I have to go. I have to go see them. And I bought tickets for me and a buddy. I bought the best seats I could. I was like, I don't care what the cost. I bought the best seats I could. Yeah. And we went and we were sitting in the club level. It was great. It was a great view. Of course, none of the stars played at all. This was like ridiculous. But this lady sat behind me the entire time and was like, this is terrible. This is nothing like Old Trafford and everything. And I'm like, this is my first time seeing my favorite team in the world. And this lady's just telling me about how this is terrible and it ain't worth nothing and everything. So yeah, all that to say, maybe Banditland during the regular season will ruin it for you a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, if you can make it up during that playoffs, I mean, they'll definitely have it in the first round, whoever they face, and then they'll probably have it in the second round as well, depending on the seeding. But I imagine they'll end up with the first seed and have home field advantage throughout. So as long as they don't lose in the first round, definitely try and do that. Well, Neil, thank you so much. As always, is really appreciate any kind of conversation. And it's been awesome as usual.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Thank you to Adam for joining me today. Well, for joining me 2 weeks ago, I guess. My bad. I apologize for taking so long to get this up. Please go follow Adam. Check out the Lacrosse Matrix podcast on Lacrosse Culture Daily. And don't forget to test yourself against his son, Preston. Thank you for listening to me ramble and rant. When you don't do a show for a couple of weeks, it's kind of like a kinked water hose that gets released. So hopefully you found some joy in it. As always, follow the show on social media. We are at RunOutPod on Instagram and on Twitter. And I ask for questions from you guys every week, so make sure that you are following us so that you can be featured on the show. And if you could do me a huge favor and leave a like, a comment, and or even a rating on the show wherever you're listening, it really, really does help the show. It helps people find the show. It helps us maybe be able to market ourselves to potential sponsors so that we can keep churning these episodes out. But that is it for me today. I will be back, like I said earlier, with Bill Shore later this week. We have, again, a ton to talk about with the Redwoods, so be sure to keep an eye out for that episode later this week. But until then, I will catch you guys on the internet.